Morning, fellas.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Morning,
Good.
Kyle.
Doing good.
So, I guess just first thing, tell us about the event you're a part of and just the experience with that and your role within it.
Look, the Ozzie Newsome GM Forum really is a new name. There was a very similar program the last 2 years that Fritz Pollard has put on in conjunction with the Black College Football Hall of Fame for the coaches. So I've presented to them in the past. This is the first year that they named it the Ozzie Newsome GM Forum. They bring in a variety of people to present, to aspiring GMs and aspiring, head coaches. And, last year I was speaking more in terms of the nature of the position and the relationship that the position has, the importance of the position. And then this year, it was just basically on the salary cap in general, but it's trying to give up and coming executives a viewpoint of all of the things that they're going to have to deal with in their careers as they move forward, whether it's personnel related issues, training related issues, salary cap related issues, and so forth. So just trying to be another voice for them to educate them and for each other to exchange ideas and network as well.
Kai, how important is that for people of color to have this resource, especially chasing after these positions? I mean, this has been kind of at the forefront of the discussion these last couple of years with affording these opportunities to people.
Yeah, look, I think every step in the right direction is important. It may not be as long as a step as people may want or people may feel comfortable with, or it may not do as much as certain individuals want, but something is always better than nothing. And I think it's a vehicle that's continuing to grow, continuing to evolve. With each passing year, it seems like more and more ownership is getting involved in those meetings, which I think is important. And overall, I think the exposure for people who haven't necessarily been in their positions very long or haven't necessarily been in the league as long, just to have that vehicle to connect with other people around the league, I think is an important step in the right direction.
Kind of touched on that, but having participation in that, that is a big part of this, right? And just having people like the Mara family or whatever who's been in this. They are like kind of a critical step in this, right?
Yeah, I do think ownership is a critical step in the right direction. They're the ones who are ultimately doing the hiring, firing. So, the more exposure they get to, candidates, the better it is overall. And like I said, I don't think there's ever going to be any system that anybody universally says, this is perfect, this is exactly what everybody wants. You're never going to be able to please everybody. But as long as you have open discourse and open dialogue, it gives you the opportunity to express your opinions and in certain instances, express your frustrations, with the process and hopefully move the ball forward, whether that ends up working out for you individually or working out for those who come behind you.
Kai, you mentioned you presented on the cap, and we've covered your work for a long time, but I'm not sure we've ever gotten to talk to you about it. Just kind of in general, and this might be a way too broad question, and I can refine it if I need to, but what is kind of your cap philosophy?
It's hard to pinpoint, and, like you said, that is a general question in terms of a philosophy. Look, I would say in general, a very basic philosophy is I want to try and maintain as much flexibility to give, Mickey and the coaches the resources that they need. I don't want to be in a position to say that we can't do something because of the cap. Now, obviously, it does affect our operations and what we can and can't do, but you just want to try and maintain as much flexibility as possible.
Like a lot of people seem to view it kind of as a hard wall. Do you look at it more like it is a problem to solve? It's like something to work around that can be stretched and manipulated and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, in undergrad, I had an accounting background, and then I worked in finance. So I pretty much view this as the CBA is very similar to GAAP principles. So how you arrive at a certain point. There's going to be certain rules and regulations you're going to have to go through, and there's going to be several hard black and whites, but there's going to be a lot of gray, and then you can work within those gray areas to get the things you need done. Ultimately, when you're negotiating these deals, I mean, the cash is what it's going to be, right? And you don't want to be in a position where you're negotiating cash for cap or vice versa. You're negotiating in cash, and then you'll figure out how to make the cap work after you negotiate the overall deal.
Now, this is one I wanted to ask you for a while. Did you create Deescalators? Were you the first person to put like performance Deescalators and contracts? I remember a few of those, maybe 2015, 2016, around there.
I had a couple of first. I don't necessarily think that I don't want to take credit for something that wasn't mine. I don't think the Deescalator was mine. I know the first off-season workout Deescalator was mine. I did that in one of Will Smith's deals to get around this guarantee rule that was causing us issues. And now there are several clubs that use those exclusively instead of giving workout bonuses. They're all de-escalators based on the off-season workout program. I know I did that, and then I know there was a point where I did a couple of completion bonuses back in, I believe it was Jabari Greer, Stinchcombe, and Vilma, or maybe two. It was either all three or two of those three. And that was the first time and only time that those have been used.
Hey, Khai, when you were in that process, how much of the secret sauce do you share?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you?
When you're on a forum like that, when you're sharing your information with other people who are competitive in your field, how much what you know and your knowledge do you divulge to them?
I mean, look, in that sort of forum, you're not going to be very specific on, you're not going to give away trade secrets, when it comes to a public presentation, you're not going to give away those sorts of things. But, occasionally, you get calls from your peers, from your counterparts, and, they ask you, hey, how did this work? Or, where did you come up with that idea? And, there's a free exchange of ideas. Because you also have to figure, coming from the league office, before I came down to New Orleans, I mean, my job was to advise clubs on doing these very things. So I already had those relationships with all of the negotiators, around the league. So as they were looking to construct their contracts and asking questions of, well, how do I structure this, or how do I structure that? I mean, that was part of my job. So some of those relationships have maintained through coming to an individual club, but each one of these negotiations is really going to be unique and take on a life of its own. There's never going to be a situation where all of the circumstances are exactly the same, right? So you can negotiate with the same player 2 years in a row, and it's going to be two unique situations. Your team is going to look a little bit different. The player is going to be 1 year older. You're going to have 1 year more information, data points to review and go over. So everyone is going to be unique. And I think you need to approach it as such. And as you figure out how you're going to structure that deal and fit it within your plans versus short-term and long-term, you're going to take all of those things into account.
Hey, Khai, it seems like teams all over the league kind of follow what you're doing. Like the Voidable Years thing is now commonplace, when 5 years ago or whatnot, it wasn't. But where do you learn how to do some of these new techniques that haven't been done before? Like, do you do a lot of reading into it? Do you have someone that advises you? Because it kind of seems like you're at the forefront of some of these different ways of managing the cap that wouldn't have been heard of a little while back.
Well, I don't want to say I'm the leader on Voidable Years. I would say,
it's kind of funny. Like we see the Bengals doing it, you know that the league is.
You know, things have changed. I would say in terms of the influx of doing it this year, I think it's more circumstance. I think sometimes people do things out of circumstance, and this year with the cap going down as it has, and nobody really, projecting, 2 years ago that, nobody projecting for a pandemic, nobody projecting for these losses. Nobody really prepares for that steep of a drop in the cap. There's differences of opinion on how you project for the future, whether you're going to be conservative or liberal in your estimates. I don't like to, when projecting out into the future, I don't like to spend money that we don't have. That typically gets you into trouble. So I think this year with the cap going down, I think that's forced the hand of some clubs to consider doing some things that they haven't done before. But also I think sometimes you find a club who, has a certain MO, a certain way of doing things, and maybe all of a sudden they reach a certain level of success, and now all of a sudden they want to keep that team together. Well, now they might end up doing some things that they haven't traditionally done in order to keep that team together. So sometimes I think circumstances, lead to this. So, look, I didn't originate, any of that, but I think as you look at, what are your objectives as a staff? What are your objectives as a team? What do you want the makeup of your roster to look like, both in the current year and as you move forward? And then you try and fit the pieces of the puzzle together. So, some of it you put out ahead of time and say, hey, here's what it looks like next year. And, oftentimes it's like, well, we want to sign this player, we want to get this deal done, make it work. And, you find a way to make it work.
Khai, how did you react to seeing the term the Saints are, quote, kicking the can down the road so many times over the last decade? I mean, did you think people misinterpreted it, and how much of the team's philosophy was just recognizing that the cap was probably going to keep going up for the last decade and planning accordingly?
Well, all of those things I think are, work sort of in unison in terms of the term kicking the can. Like there's a lot of terms that are thrown around, when it comes to contracts and cap and roster makeup, that when you're on the inside looking at things, it's like, well, that's not right, or that's not the way we're looking at it. But it doesn't really serve anybody's purpose to, make this call and say, hey, that's wrong, but there's a certain level of interest in what we do. It pays all of our salaries, yours and mine included. So, hey, let's roll with it. But, kicking the can down the road.
Khai, I think your screen is frozen, Khai.
And back at dead money. I just say, like, the term often is used like there's no thought process in it. Like, hey, we're just kicking the can down the road and we're not thinking about the consequences, in the future. Certainly the cap going up, is a consideration, as you're doing that. But also what's a consideration is, what's the makeup of your team and where are you at in the life cycle of your team. I think every club has a vision, every personnel staff has a vision of the life cycle of the core of their roster. And it's, how do we keep these guys together, and how do we compete, and how do we compete at the highest level? And, certainly, the last 4 or 5 years, we've had a very good team that, we think has been on the cusp. So it's like, hey, we're going to do things to give us the best opportunity to win, and the best opportunity to win the most games that we possibly can. And, we're in the enviable position of having a talented roster. And when you have a talented roster, you got to pay guys. So, it sort of comes with the territory, but sometimes it equates to some difficult decisions of having talented players that, you can't keep because, you have to spread the wealth.
Yeah, drafting well is horrible cap management.
I mean, look,
I also want to ask you.
That's the other side of having a very good draft. Like if you're a team that has, 12 draft picks and you hit on 8 of them, well, it's good in the short term. It's good in those first, 2-3 years. But at some point, you got to figure out how are you going to pay all these guys. And with the trajectory of where salaries are going overall, it's not an easy puzzle to figure out.
You developed a great reputation, obviously, in cap management and contract negotiation, but in terms of possibly, wanting to be a future general manager, how much have you sought opportunities, and how many opportunities have the Saints given you to grow and expand as a personnel evaluator and other areas that maybe weren't part of your financial background?
I mean, look, we have a very collaborative process, here with the Saints. So ever since I've been here, I've been involved in personnel. So, it's not something that hasn't, it's not something that's been publicized or that people know. And it hasn't been something that I've been, like I'm not a self-promoter, so, it's one of those, like the squeaky wheel, right? Well, my wheel isn't squeaky, my wheel is pretty oiled pretty well. And, I'm just a spoke in the wheel and try and help our club do the best that we possibly can. But I'm involved in all of our personnel decisions and involved in all of our personnel meetings and, have done, some evaluation, in the past and during the course of my job. But, at the same time, I have a high level of respect for scouts and what they do. And it's why I say that I'm not a scout. Now I think there's a difference between being a scout and being an evaluator, right? A scout, part of what makes scouts what they are is the volume of what they do, the volume of players that they're able to review and look at and have a knowledge base to compare to. When you have other responsibilities, you're just not going to have, there's not that many hours in the day to review as many players as a scout would review, but does that mean that you don't go over your own practice film and your own players and your own free agency? Like I think if you're going to do this job effectively, you have to figure out how you're going to marry evaluation to the valuation of the player. And if you don't have a firm knowledge base of the evaluation of the player, then that's where you're going to make a lot of mistakes, contractually, with the value of the player. So those things go hand in hand. And, I would just say that, Mickey and Sean have been very, generous, if that's the right term, with the things that they allow me to do and allow me to be a part of. It's just something that hasn't necessarily been publicized or put out there. And, when it comes to, future, opportunities to be GM, I know they've had, conversations with folks. I know, Dennis Lauscha has had conversations with folks in the past, but, those are those positions that people come looking for you, whether or not you want the position is, everybody involved in the quarterback, the GM forum, I think has a desire to be a GM at some point in time in their careers. Now, are all of them actively jumping out there, waving their hands, doing cartwheels, saying, "Hey, come get me"? No, but everyone on the call would welcome a call.
Was some of the stuff you figured out with how to manipulate the cap, was that born out of necessity, or was it always fairly obvious to you that maybe people were artificially limiting themselves with this wall that could be overcome different ways?
I think it was a little bit of both. Like, again, if you go back to what I said about the completion bonuses, that I did back, whatever year that was, 8, 9, somewhere around there. That was specifically out of necessity. I was familiar with the clause in the CBA. From working in the league, I knew nobody had used it before. And there was a certain amount of curiosity and why is this in here if nobody's used it before? And yet in that particular year, there was a number of rules that were consistent with the last cap year that restricted what you can do with contracts and how you could structure contracts. And using those bonuses allowed us to structure the deal that matched the cash that we were actually negotiating and talking about. So that was born out of necessity. But after you move past that, it's just, what are you doing to, manage your overall roster and give yourself that flexibility to compete, in the current landscape and in the future.
So Khai, how does the creativity come from some natural curiosity you've always had with numbers and being able to figure things out? I mean, where does the creativity originate from?
Look, I think it's just a matter of, there is a certain amount of curiosity, but also I think it's, you want to put your club in the best position possible, and you want to be able to, when the GM and the coach say, hey, we want to do X, Y, Z, you want to figure out how to do it, right? It's not, no, we can't. Yes, you can have your opinion, but at the end of the day, it's going to be, Mickey and Sean's decision. So when they say, hey, full steam ahead, let's do it, then it's like, okay, let's figure out how to do it. And then, I will explain, here are the ramifications of doing it this way. Here are the pros and cons of doing it this way versus doing it another way. But I think flexibility and, being able to move when you want to move, being able to acquire guys when you want to acquire guys, I think that's at the forefront. And it's just having a knowledge base of figuring out the why and the when. Hey, we're going to figure that out. But the how is, I guess, what you would call the secret sauce.
Was there any particular technique you've used that it took a while for the league to sign off on, or there was a lot of discussion about it, or does that happen?
Look, whenever you do something that necessarily hasn't been done, then, you're going to have to pass those things by the league, before you actually execute. You don't want your contract to be disapproved. And, I would say that, I did that with the completion bonus structure when that came around. And, there was some ideological, or philosophical discussions there. And look, on occasion, even in, rudimentary, every year reconciliation of various items on the cap, sometimes you'll have philosophical disagreements with, how a CBA provision is being interpreted by the league. And, you voice your disagreement, and, they'll think about it, and then they'll give you a response. I just had one, recently on a very minor issue, but the logic didn't make sense, and, we had a discussion about it, and, they said they were going to treat it a certain way. I'm like, okay, and you can't argue with that. They're the rule keepers. So, at the end of the day, all you want to do is you want to be able to do what your club wants to do while abiding by the rules, right? You're going to, walk up to that line, but you're not going to cross the line. And, that takes, some discussion with the league in terms of new things in order to not cross that line.
Why don't we take one last one for Khai before he gets on with his day?
I think the general attitude going into this offseason, when everybody saw the cap floor, was, especially with y'all's relation to it, was like, sky's falling. Everybody saw like the $100 million figure and everything. And they were wondering how you were going to get there. I was just curious, when you guys were assessing that as an organization and all the kind of steps you needed to do, what was kind of like the mood inside the building when you're just like, okay, these are, all the moves we're going to need to make to just even be compliant? Like, how are you guys kind of viewing that?
Look, these things, sort of occur organically. There's a certain amount of, hey, if A happens, then B or C happens. If A doesn't happen, then B or C doesn't happen. So, you're always ready for that, for lack of a better term, that sudden change. And that's where I say the flexibility has to be involved. And, you understand, hey, you're going into free agency and you have a certain number of free agents that you want to keep. And, okay, where are negotiations at? And as one guy comes into the fold, that picture becomes clear. And now you can, turn your focus and say, okay, now that we have, something concrete in one area, now we can look at these other areas. And as those things come into clear. It's really not a lot different than, you know, as you do a puzzle, right? Now, I'm not into puzzles, but my wife likes puzzles. So they, you know, they do the outline first. They try and do the corners first, you know, and then you start pulling the inside. Well, you know, it's sort of similar. When one puzzle piece comes in and you sort of figure out where that fits, then that allows you to look at other things. But, you know, I think the mood has always been great internally. You know, similar to what you guys said earlier, is like from the outside looking in, everybody's saying the sky is falling, and, you know, we sort of know what our plans are, and know, you know, what steps need to be taken. And, you know, sometimes those are difficult decisions, but, you know, decisions that we have to make nonetheless. But overall, you know, as we look at the process, you know, there will be times where an opportunity comes up that maybe you weren't thinking about, you know, ahead of time, or you didn't know about ahead of time. And now all of a sudden that changes the trajectory of what you want to do. And, you know, there are one or two things that happened, you know, this year that we didn't necessarily anticipate. And then it's like, well, okay, now this opportunity presented itself. Well, we want to take advantage of that opportunity. Well, what else do we need to do in order to accomplish that? And it's a constant evaluation of that overall puzzle as we look to solve it going forward. But I would say the mood has always been good. You know, we knew that there were going to be several difficult decisions, and you know, once, you know, Drew made his final decision that yes, I am, you know, retiring, then, you know, that was a puzzle piece that made, you know, some other things, you know, clearer, and we were able to move and make some other decisions with the club. But I would say there was nothing that really jumped out and surprised us, you know, at all. You know, but certainly there was a certain amount of enthusiasm, as there is every year. You know, we're always enthusiastic about retaining our own players. We're always enthusiastic about the opportunity of bringing new players in, and we're always enthusiastic about being able to add talent in the draft. So there's always a certain level of excitement. And, you know, I think, you know, Mickey and Sean sort of breathe that through the rest of the club, is that, hey, we're going to be competitive, and here's the how and the when, and let's just figure out how we're going to, you know, complete this puzzle and get to where we want to go.
Khai, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Khai.
Appreciate it.